Welcome back, everyone, to the latest installment in the Dr. Mary Show. I'm here today with the CEO of Hyasynth, Chen. He's a brilliant chemist, and I've enjoyed all of my conversations leading up to the show today with Kevin. I think you're going to enjoy listening to him and talking about THC and all of the new and different and exciting ways that we're able to extract THC from something other than just a bud from a plant. So he's very innovative, a new technology that I think we're going to have a lot of fun with and see quite a bit more of in the coming years. So Kevin, thank you so much for agreeing to be on the show, for taking time out of your busy day.
Yeah, likewise, real pleasure to be here, and appreciate you having me alongside, I guess, share the stage with all the other guests. I think I was just checking out your podcast and you've got some amazing people there too. So it's really great to be here.
Well, you're an absolute perfect fit, I think, because my goal is to bring people in who are working in medical cannabis, but also that are working innovatively and disruptively, bringing very interesting new products or services to market. So I'm very interested in what you're doing. And so if you want to give a sort of a broader introduction of what your company is up to, then we'll get to work digging into the specifics a bit more.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think we'll spend quite a bit of time on what exactly we're doing here. It is a new technology. It is something that is on its way to the market. But what it is that we've developed is a strain of yeast, similar to baker's yeast, that you can grow relatively easily with sugar and water. But instead of that just being a yeast that's growing, the yeast is also producing CBD. Or THC. Could be a range of different cannabinoids that we choose to produce in our yeast cells. But you're growing a yeast in a big steel tank instead of growing a plant in the ground, basically. And then at the end of your growth cycle, which for yeast is normally 6 days, for cannabis plants is normally a few months, you do an extraction and purification step to get to ultra pure CBD, which you can then use as an ingredient in could be a medical application, could be nutraceutical or cosmetics or wherever else the cannabinoids are used, right? And a bit about, so Hyasynth, we're the core developers of this technology, and we're on our way to commercializing our first products with our technology. And we're at a point where we are ready to start scaling up production of CBD and producing samples and getting it to be more of a commercial product on the market. But we're not quite there yet. We're on our way. We're a startup. We've been around for about 7 years, and we're a team of 19 staff here out of Montreal in Canada, where we started the company and have been developing this technology from scratch since 2014. And that's a bit of the history and exactly what we do. I'll let you interject there if you have quite
no, that's a great. I mean, what I think is very interesting here, because sometimes you can get a bit lost in the science if you're not a scientist, and even if you are a scientist, you can get lost in new science that you don't really understand. But so what you're talking about is the development and the scale of a technology that will splice the molecules, the THC or CBD or the cannabinoid of interest, into a yeast molecule. And then you can replicate the molecule simply with some sugar, water, and a hot plate.
Yeah, so I'll give you another example or another analogy of this. And I was just watching your episode with Dr. Schiller, and he talked about endocrinology and the insulin, path. So I'm gonna go back to the insulin example, right? Which is a great one because you talked about this example of using pancreas mush as the first version of a diabetes treatment, right? And that's what it was 100 years ago. But in the 1970s, there was this crisis of how much pig pancreases can really mash up to serve all the people who need it, and so on and so forth. And so a company called Genentech got started, and they were focused on producing insulin using a bacteria.
And we worried not only about how many pancreases we have to mash up, but the other issue was this exposure to pig protein or cow protein, which was where they were primarily being sourced, and wondering about autoimmune reactions for that. Or some people would develop allergic reactions and then become much more brittle and not be able to handle the insulin. So we really did need a purer molecule, because for so long it was just this very unusual sort of porcine insulin that was derived from the pancreas. So I'm sorry, what did
Yeah, exactly. That's great. That's great. That's great you interject there, because there's so many issues, and that highlights a lot of the issues that we're seeing in the cannabis industry as well. So what the Genentech did is that they took the human version of insulin. So in humans, there's a gene for insulin, which, if you have a certain type of diabetes, that gene doesn't work properly, or there's something wrong with it, right? And so they put that gene into a bacteria, and then that bacteria can just grow normally. You feed it sugar and water, and it produces human insulin, which you can then extract and purify and then provide as a medicine. So that was one of the token examples of genetic engineering, kind of really interesting case example, and really successful for that company, right?
And then you're like, what else can we do? What else can we splice in and replicate and to reduce cost and increase purity? And then voila, Kevin Chen and Hyasynth.
Exactly. And that's where, like, we look at the genes in cannabis. There's genes there that produce, that are responsible for producing CBD and THC. It's a lot more complicated than the insulin gene. That's there's a deeper levels and types of genetic engineering that we do that are different from what we did in the 1970s. But what it boils down to is that, we have a yeast strain instead of a cannabis plant that produces this product, which, removes that need to start with plant mush. You have a yeast that produces the thing, and you can have more options for what types of compounds that you can make. You have more options for what, cost metrics you need to achieve and how much scale you need to produce. And in some ways, it's almost like a trend for natural products. We find things in nature, we realize that there's medical potential for them, and then we find a new way to produce them, right? And so we're that generation, the new way that we are going to produce cannabinoids for mass markets, for markets that need like higher quality stuff, or that need lower cost materials to access new markets, all kinds of things like that.
As I see this, it's a very pure cannabinoid that is, you're not running the risk of getting any insecticides or pesticides into your product. You don't have to worry about the heavy metals in your COA because you're growing it in water and sugar and yeast. And then so all of that, right, is just not an issue anymore.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. And then there's also the benefit of it not having an odor. So I would think if you're making an edible, or if you're making a drink and you don't want it to have any type of smell, do you lose the odor as well?
Yeah, you do, because all those terpenes and that, like, kind of skunk smell that you get from cannabis that tends to carry over into edibles, you do lose all that. And to some extent, I follow cannabis closely enough where people talk about the importance of having some of those terpenes and those flavors to come along with that. And there's some ideas beyond that we can talk about. But for us and our purpose, and what we're creating here is more about the individual pure compounds, like pure CBD. How do we provide just that, and have that be more useful than and more beneficial than using a cannabis extracted type product, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree with you. I mean, it's very exciting technology, pure and at its. I mean, would you describe this as synthetic? What are the words that you're using to describe how this is being made? Because everybody always wants to avoid the S word,
Yeah, the S word, exactly. And we had this big issue early on. I think nowadays it's a bit more clear that, like, synthetic cannabis was like a huge issue, right? But it wasn't cannabis, it wasn't even cannabinoids in that case, or they were chemically synthesized, products that were being sold as like synthetic cannabis that people were buying. That was, this New York Times article saying synthetic cannabis is bad. That's the whole thing. So we really try to avoid using the word synthetic in our case. And in our case, we usually use the word biosynthetic to describe what we do.
Biosynthetic. Okay.
Yeah. Where it's still a biological process that's responsible for making the end product. And when you're growing yeast, you have relatively low cost ingredients and more sustainable ingredients compared to petroleum based chemistry, for example. And those are some key differences that we want to make sure are clear for our audience, or for our customers, or people who are buying our ingredients, is that not only are you buying it's a biosynthetic ingredient, but that also means that it's more sustainable, and that you do get the level of quality that is more clear or easier to define for us compared to like a cannabis extract product, perhaps, right? And so biosynthetic is the word that we like to use.
I like biosynthetic. That's better. And it allows you to just be like, okay, wait a minute, what exactly are they doing? Because sometimes that exposure to a powerful acid or, certain distillations create anxiety in the consumer. And certain distillations also make it somewhat difficult to distill off. Like, for example, when you're making D8, trying to get all of the D9 out of a D8 product can really be tricky and add a lot of expense to the process. But if you're just growing yeast, you're getting this very pure product. So after you replicate it, then, this may seem like a silly question, but is it uncleaved from the surrounding molecular structure before it's sold, or is it sold as sort of like a THC sparked yeast molecule?
It would be separated entirely from the yeast. So really, maybe in the same analogy as with the insulin stuff, like we're looking for ultra pure, like just CBD isolate or just THC isolate, for example, on its own. We don't want any of the yeast material to carry over to that. And we do know that that's a concern for some people, where they are worried about, GMOs, or worried about this like yeast as like a, different organism, right. But we're not gonna, that's not part of the end product, right? And some, another way to look at it is a transformation of, sugar into pure CBD, and the yeast is just an in-between step.
Okay, good. That's exactly what I was hoping that I would hear. And then, is it true that it's coming in at half the price of THC that's coming from greenhouses? And then the follow-up to that question is, if that's true, who's going to take over all these greenhouses? Because if we're able to cut the cost by that much, what are we going to do with all these grow facilities?
Yeah, well, I'm of the belief that we can use the grow facilities for growing like food, right, and do food production and help, solve world hunger or whatever, instead of growing more cannabis, perhaps. But anyways, that's that'll be up to them to decide. I think there's all kinds of interesting things to grow, and there's plenty of room in the market for cannabis growers too, regardless of what we do. But yeah, price is what you wanted to talk about, and half price is. That's great. I think that's what we, on one hand, what we strive to achieve. I think in reality, we are more likely to come in with something that is more like 1/10 the price. As we look at, where we're at and the long term and what our goal is. And
I'm sorry, 1/10, like a 90% reduction in cost.
Yeah, that's really what we aim for as a benchmark, and really like for us, when it comes to operating our business and thinking about what how much revenues or profits we generate from our products, and also what markets we can access, we usually try to keep that in mind as like a benchmark for us. So half is great. 1/10 is a more ambitious target that I like to strive for because I'm ambitious, I guess.
It's a pretty ambitious target. And that's an incredibly disruptive target. If the cost can go that low, it can really reduce a lot of barriers for a lot of people.
Yeah, exactly. And that's and those barriers are part of what we look at when it comes to the impact that we'll have in the market, right? We don't want cost to be a barrier, or uncertainty of quality to be a barrier for people to access this stuff. It should be relatively easy to get access to, whether it's a cost thing or even a regulatory thing or quality thing, right?
Right. And I think that's where we really, where the medicinal part of the value of this is going to be so important, because for so many people that are in medicinal cannabis, they've already lost a lot of, any acquired wealth. All of those assets have been redistributed, and seized in bankruptcy in a lot of cases due to their healthcare. So they really don't have the hundreds of dollars that they need every month to go to a dispensary. So this is very, very powerful technology for the healthcare industry and medical cannabis.
Yeah, absolutely. And the other interesting analogy, I think, as well, that we pull also from insulin, like I think we do have a clear place in the sort of consumer healthcare world and in the cosmetics world when people want to integrate CBD and stuff into their cosmetics. But for pharmaceutical companies as well, like, cost is part of that equation too. And then how do we provide, or I guess maybe quality is a bigger part of that equation for the pharmaceutical companies. And we've had plenty of conversations with different kinds of large and small healthcare and pharmaceutical companies who are looking at the space. And there's a lot of fear from their perspectives to try and source stuff from hemp or from cannabis because of those risks of like pesticides or risks of like THC contamination or uncertainty in like what's in the finished dose of the product. And this is partly the fault of like, so many hemp growers that are trying to just like do their thing. But there's plenty of cases and the FDA reports that come out that show that, hey, look, half the products that are out there don't contain what they're on the label. And so for us, we want to use manufacturing systems that are more similar to what the pharmaceutical industry has seen before with insulin, and that makes it a much more relatable example and much more reliable in terms of the quality that a company will need to develop a really great pharmaceutical product.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, it immediately harkens back to the insulin, but it also harkens sort of forward with the psilocybin crowd and how all of the psilocybin initially was being studied as, as an inconsistent plant-based product until they grew it on an E. coli medium. I mean, is there a reason, Kevin, for why you would choose a yeast medium over an E. coli medium? But I mean, I think that both of them are very well tolerated for people. If there were any contamination with a bit of yeast or E. coli, we all live with that all the time. So, but I'd imagine that I imagine two things that, I mean, the yeast or E. coli probably aren't a big difference as the base medium. And most of your distillations are probably pretty contaminant free with those products.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So we don't worry about which system that we could use. And it's actually getting a bit more into like the technology that we've developed that is unique for us, where yeast is the most suitable host for cannabinoid production, period. And it's because of some of the specialized chemistry that's happening inside of a cannabis plant that gets you to make THC. That same specialized chemistry is more like what you see in a yeast cell, and it's very different from what you would see in a E. coli cell. So you have some challenges if you're trying to import the cannabinoid biosynthesis pathway into E. coli, whereas yeast is a lot more used to dealing with those kinds of that kind of chemistry, right? And so I'm giving you like the high level, like as kind of simplified version of that. But basically yeast is a great host. It can be scaled very easily, and it has that cellular machinery that is a bit more like a cannabis plant cell, which makes it easier to engineer a cannabinoid biosynthesis pathway there, right? And it's something that does,
because they're both plants rather than, I wonder, I mean, why would it have similar chemical, cellular machinery?
They're both eukaryotic hosts, at least. They're not both plants, because cannabis, those are plant cells. We have fungal cells, which are yeast, and E. coli cells they're bacteria. There's no longer a nucleus there. There's no longer certain enzymes that are involved in glycosylation of proteins. Is kind of one of the challenges there. That it's basically a set of modifications to the genes that happen after the genes are expressed. That yeast has machinery for that, but E. coli doesn't, and that's because of the natural difference between bacteria and fungi and eukaryotic organisms and prokaryotic organisms. And so it's makes a lot more sense to work with the yeast system, the biochemistry that yeast has for producing those cannabinoids.
That actually makes a lot of sense to me. Okay, I don't know if you a non-scientist who's listening to the podcast, but I think you did as good of a job as anyone can explaining it. You guys are based in Canada, right?
We are based in Canada.
Okay. And in Canada, I mean, the distribution in Canada is unfettered. I mean, do you know anything about the legalities in the US or how that might proceed here?
Yeah, so it's one of the unique things about a technology as well, where because we are growing yeast using a fermentation process, fermentation is pretty widespread. Like there's facilities in Canada that do fermentation, there's facilities in the US that do fermentation, there's facilities in Europe that do fermentation. Right now they're doing fermentation for probably some food ingredients or some pharmaceutical ingredients. But it's normal for companies, who have unique yeast strains, who have unique technology, to hire those facilities to produce for them. So when it comes to thinking about like where do we go to market with our technology, we have this unique opportunity that we can go and access these facilities basically anywhere in the world and produce our pure cannabinoid ingredients for whichever market that needs it most. And that's pretty different from like a cannabis grower, right? Where there's some pretty hard lines between like, growing cannabis in Canada and then trying to get it to the US. That's like basically impossible. Even getting the seeds across, when it comes to starting a brand new grow is a big complicated process. And we don't have that limitation. So it's really interesting actually from interesting things that we can do with regards to globalization and access to our supply chain, that can't be done with cannabis.
That's really exciting. That's fantastic that you can cross boundaries with the technology and just bring the technology in, because at that point you're a technology company rather than a cannabis company, and the restrictions are so much looser for a technology company than they are for cannabis companies.
Yeah, looser in some sense. I think there are still plenty of regulations and quality considerations that we do take into like our process. So in some sense, we have different hoops that we have to jump through. But our the hoops that we have to jump through don't involve, finding land, spending a few months growing the plants or building greenhouses, dealing with all of the, material that comes from a cannabis, grow, where you have like, tons of flower that you're handling. A lot of that's all, has to be, and then all of that has to be regulated by like a state or by a nation, right? There has to be some kind of regulation around that. So we do fall under some of those regulations, but even a lot of the stuff when it comes to for example, in Canada, you have to produce 2 batches of cannabis before you're allowed, and have those be qualified. One or 2 batches. I have to. Somebody's going to read this, watch this later on, and be like, "No, it's actually 1 batch."
No,
yeah. But anyway, you do have to grow like a round of cannabis before you're allowed to sell it, right? That's part of the legislation today. And to do that also adds 3 months to your like regulatory time period where you're waiting to get allowed to do sales. And in our case, we don't have to do that. Our batch run would be 1 week instead of 3 months. So it's a huge difference in like the ways and the speeds at which we can enter new markets, and where we can provide ingredients. So all kinds of things that just make like, super interesting scalability opportunity for us.
A super interesting scalability opportunity, especially since so much of the time when you're trying to formulate, you're really trying to get rid of that odor or that taste, because you want to have just a really perfectly sweet, tasty gummy. And then having that background odor or taste just, throws it off. And then you're constantly doing all of these different extractions, mushroom extracts that will break up the that odor, and that taste. But then, it also ends up impacting the flavor overall. So it just becomes a bit of a chasing your tail, trying to get the flavors right. So this odorless, tasteless THC that just becomes an addition is profoundly game changing for the formulators.
Yeah, exactly. And that's, ideally what we want people to start thinking about more of in the, this cannabinoid industry, is that, these are ingredients and they can be you can choose how you want to formulate them. You don't have to do all of that extra work of like trying to deodorize this, remove that, or like, dealing with multiple suppliers of like extract that are all confusing. It should just be like, CBD, in a barrel or a jar or whatever format, and then that's what you use in your formulation process, and then how that's going to work. It's always going to be consistent because it's pure, and there's no more headache anymore, or it's just you know what you're dealing with, and that's what we want to produce, right?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah, it's very simplified. I mean, what do you see as, it just seems like a brilliant solution to so many different problems, but what do you see as the biggest barrier here?
The biggest barrier used to be technology, where like back when we started in 2014, there was basically no research done on how cannabinoids could be produced in a yeast cell at all. So really starting from scratch, and it took us 7 years to get to where we are today, where we're the only company that has a yeast strain that is producing high yields of CBD, and that's something unique that we've developed. And so now that we've overcome that technological barrier of like, the yeast strain that needs to exist, the process has to be developed, we can start to look at how do we scale this and how do we commercialize this? And now our challenge has become more thinking about the regulations, thinking about, who we're going to supply to, who's going to partner with us to help bring our products to market, and how do we, get that commercial equation of our company really, well set up. And with that in mind,
you've got
sorry?
an operational issue.
Uh,
it sounds like operations, like you've got to get
operations. Yeah. I mean, it's like I mean, the way I describe it as well is like most of our team is scientists. Like we're all R&D people. Even my background is originally science, but now we have to start becoming start acting more like a cannabis company in some ways, or start acting more like a pharmaceutical company, and bring on those kinds of staff or form those kinds of relationships. But this is something that goes out, even to listeners of usually in any podcast or whatever. I usually open this up to say like, hey, we are working on commercializing this stuff, and we are looking for those people who are share the same values or who are in need of pure CBD isolate or see an opportunity there to work with us. Like, you're welcome to reach out, and we can form a relationship where we're able to supply you with the best CBD isolate in the world, and you can help us bring that to market, help us make that available to people. But you know this, right? That how many all the steps that have to go into the commercialization and like the going from your isolate to ultimately a patient or a consumer who needs it. And those are all of the hurdles that we're excited to be dealing with now that we're over like the big first hurdle.
Yeah, no kidding. I mean, getting the product to be able to be ready to go to the market takes so much longer time and money, and just chronological time to pull it together. And then when it's ready and you finally have to switch gears, there's a bit of a lag, because you're like, wait a minute, these are all brand new skills I have to figure out.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm thrilled for you with this great opportunity. It's something I hadn't even thought of. And ever since I've heard about it, I've been really excited to connect with you and hear about how you see it developing and taking shape, which is pretty similar to the way I see it. I mean, I feel like there's going to always be a purist who's going to want to have a bud that they break up in their grinder and roll in a paper. But I mean, more and more options become available, and so many people, I mean, especially in the grip of a global pandemic, people don't want to smoke. They want to have their have an edible, or not necessarily get a smoke exposure. So having an edible available is and having a nice clean edible like what you're able to do is going to just add a very powerful option for a lot of people.
Yeah, exactly. And so I can flip you back a question, thinking along those lines. So we have this ability now. We have this technology where we can produce CBD, pure, using our yeast strains. We can also produce other cannabinoids, even the more rare ones as well. Like, we can have really pick and choose. Like, you have the whole spectrum of cannabinoids. You can choose which parts of the spectrum you want to put into a product and have that exist, right? So my question for you would be like, imagine you have the superpower now. Like, what would you do with it? What would be the most interesting opportunities? And that could be thinking from like a patient lens or from consumer lens as well. Like, there's all kinds of ways that these cannabinoids can be relevant for all kinds of people, right? And it's always a challenge or fun even to just imagine like, what's possible now that we have this.
Yeah, I mean, we do have a lot of great CBD products, and in a lot of cases, that's a really great place to start, and a place where a lot of people finish. Once they get into a CBD that they trust and they can rely on, then they don't necessarily feel like they have to go beyond there. But a lot of the cannabinoids concentrates are really changing the algorithms or the treatment protocols for people. I mean, specifically, for example, for insomnia, we used to start with CBD, titrate up the CBD, and then add some THC. But now, definitely, there's a good position for a CBN concentrate. We find that people who use a CBN product often don't have to add THC. And, the Delta 8 is more of a calming, milder, gentler buzz compared to THC. So in terms of it being like a weed light or a high without the anxiety and without the paranoia. So a lot of people, are so the sleep algorithm has shifted from CBD to CBD plus THC, now going from CBD to CBN and D8, and then finally adding THC. So I think the hemp derived concentrates are new and innovative and exciting in this community, and also the CBN. I think CBG is going to be powerful for immunity, and I'm curious what is going to come out of Israel for various autoimmune conditions or things where we want to tweak the immune response. But immune responses are always so complex, and you turn them up or dial them down in one location, and you get reverberations for miles. So it's these immune system modifiers are interesting and also demand your respect. So I think the CBG will probably have a powerful position too, but I'm sure as we pick these apart, we'll continue to find really great specific products. But if I can just continue to bring this thought around, I feel like all of this like genetic testing and all of the, you have this particular condition, you should use this particular terpene profile in cannabis. People might not really like that. They might not like how high they get. It might make them feel anxious. And then they think, I'm really not going to get benefit from using this. When in reality, the data that we have is that cannabis probably works, to help to slow the growth of cancer. We don't have actual human trials that cannabis actually does that. We know it helps with like the nausea and the sleep, but really having a product that will allow you to get it into your system is the most important thing. It's not that if you don't get the exact right terpene profile, it's not going to help you. So that's why I think this product is so great, Kevin, because you're going to be able to provide more odorless, tasteless, really delicious little, or just simply neutral, like medical things. And people can try and not have a lot of that stigma associated with it, bad odor and all of those things that people just don't want to deal with. Or like, I'm standing here in New York, I could flip the phone around. I'm looking at probably 17,000 people just looking over the Upper East Side. I'm in my room because my daughter's working from home today too. But we're not in a position here in New York to have odor, and I've got neighbors on all four sides, so I just have to, and on top and below. Yeah. So we can't, you just have to be good with your neighbors, and a lot of people. They all
have to be cool with it. It's like that, just this whole little game.
So it makes it a lot easier if something is odorless, and then you don't have to try to convince somebody that, I don't think people are into it. Most people just aren't into that odor,
Yeah. It's a powerful odor. Every time I smell it in the streets, it's like the smell of success is what.
Yeah, I know. I feel like reversing
but it's a little joke that we say.
But the problem with the pharmaceuticals is a whole different problem. You're going to have to get into all of the, if you're just a technology company, but if you're starting to get into production, with pharmaceuticals, then there's all of the health claims that have to be made, and the marketing has to be extremely tight, and you have to be just very careful on how you train people. So, I've worked in years for Eli Lilly and Amgen in the pharmaceutical industry. So, yeah, that's a different bird than selling THC or CBD in a recreational market.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's something that we, we're keen to approach it, like I said, with the quality and the reliability that a pharmaceutical company might, find valuable, right? Or the certainty and removing that stigma even for them to enter the space. And I think that's going to be key, and that's part of and this kind of conversation of using precision, using cannabinoids that you know exactly what's in it, and you're able to dose precisely without question of who the supplier is, and choose which cannabinoids you can choose to dose, and modulating immune responses and being able to like have that precision that you can if you need 1 more milligram of this or 1 more milligram of that, that's great. You can have that control over what your product will be ultimately. And those are all things that I'm a huge believer in.
Yeah. Yeah. This is just a really great product. I mean, I'm looking forward to talking to you again. I mean, in 6 months, but I'm also looking forward to talking to you again in 5 years, because I think it's going to be an industry leading approach. I don't see how it can't be. I mean, I don't understand what barrier could be put in place that would make this technology not move forward.
Me too. I think that's that's the point that we're at now. It's a lot of rapid scale from here, a lot of growth, a lot of interesting and new challenges ahead for what we're going to do and how we're going to take this market. But like I said, we're ready for that journey. It's super exciting.
Wonderful, wonderful. Well, I mean, the group of people that's listening to this are cannabis interested, canna curious, but also, of course, business people associated with the NECB and everybody in pro cannabis and the medical side. I mean, how would you like people to get a hold of you if somebody has a question or has an opportunity that they want to work with you on, Kevin?
By email is best. Just shoot me a note, kevin.chen@hyasynthbio.com. Or you can go to our website and you can fill out the little form there. It goes to me as well, so I'll see it for sure. However people want to do it, whatever's easiest, whatever's most friendly.
I mean, yeah. How are you balancing all this? This is a really marvelous and apparently going to be very successful startup that you've immersed yourself in. Just as an individual, how are you maintaining balance and taking care of yourself?
Very good question.
Probably feels oftentimes like you're not.
Yeah, it does honestly, or it's felt like that for a long time. I think lately, and this is speaking personally, with the pandemic, everything that changed a lot of like lifestyle as well, where I think my earlier life would have been more about like seeing when the next conference is, booking flights, getting on planes, staying in hotels, and always having to like jump around quite a bit. I think lately it's been about spending time with friends, spending time with family, and reconnecting in some ways as well, where I lead a less busy lifestyle in some sense, or at least the time that I spend on planes can be allocated to time spent with family instead. And I think that's a big part of me looking after myself. But we've built a really great team here at Hyasynth. I think we're phenomenal in the way that we work together and the way that we achieve our milestones and the benchmarks that we provide. And so in some sense as well, I would say my job isn't that stressful because I'm supported by some really, really great people and some really, really great investors. And so that's all part of having.
I think that's really great. A really, really great point, though, that when your job feels stressful or when you feel like it's not getting done, the thing to do is bring more people around you and really surround yourself with high quality people. And then you can move a lot faster because you have, people that you can trust handling what they're good at handling. So that is really, really great advice.
Yeah, absolutely. And I love spending time in my community as well. And this is part of it. I would say this conversation even is part of my own self-care ritual to some extent. Talking to people who are enthusiastic about the same things that I am is amazing and energizing. So I love it.
I agree with you. As exhausting as the conferences can be and all of the back and forthing and in and out of planes and in and out of suitcases, it is a pleasure to connect with everybody who's doing the same thing. It feels like a very unstoppable, very powerful force right now across our whole continent. Kevin, thank you so much for all of this great content. I can't wait to hear from you again in several months and hear how things are going. And really, really impressed and with your powerful, innovative work. So thank you again for being on the podcast.
Oh, thank you. Really appreciate the time and appreciate the audience. It's been wonderful to chat with you. And also very eager to keep in touch and give you some updates as how things go.
Yeah. And thank you everybody for watching. Of course, we can't have a podcast without a great audience. So keep sending me great ideas for who you want to talk to and what kinds of topics you want me to cover. And I'll just keep doing my best to provide you some great stuff to watch. Have a great week, everyone.